What's happening, folks? Back with another reaction, back with some more Kate Bush. And we're returning to Ariel 2005, and I wanted to start by saying I really appreciated everyone's comments, as always, in the Kate Bush deep dive, not only informative, but giving me background and context and interpretations. But a number of you commented that previous reaction I did to a painter's tale and sunset, that my reaction was especially engaged and that my conversations or thoughts after hearing the tunes was especially like florid and rhapsodic, as someone said. I felt that when I finished that reaction. I remember sort of saying out loud even, like, wow, I feel like I really connected to those tunes, which of course is a testament to Kate's creativity and her composition and the dynamic nature of her music. So it was not so much even about what I had thought and said, but it was the way that my brain had been set alight and was shimmering with the golden hues that were referenced in the tunes, certainly Sunset in particular, and I feel like it was very validating that a number of folks noticed that and commented on it, so shout out to you. And like with that reaction, we're going to do 2 tracks here, which is to say I've been checking, and when I queued up the next track in my media player to react to here, I noticed that it also is very short, so I queued up the tune after that as well. And the second track is somewhere in between. I want to make sure I have the first track right, Aerial Tale. So yes, we're going to listen to both Aerial Tale and Somewhere in Between. And, oh sorry, it was the Painter's Link, I apologize. But yes, ultimately, I'm curious as to the nature of what is, in some ways, a title track. Obviously, the word aerial included, although with a tail, and it's written as in a tail biologically or on an animal's body rather than a tale as in, a story or a narrative, so I'm curious about that phrasing and spelling. But given that it's so short, I notice it's about a minute long, I'm guessing it's not a proper song, or at least if it is a song, it is a very concise and brief one. And then somewhere in between is a middle area, a no man's land perhaps, a limbo even, the idea of being neither here nor there, which in one way speaks to the human propensity or proclivity for categorization, putting things in distinct classifications and perhaps being frustrated when a piece of data or indeed an artifact is hard to categorize, is hard to delineate or to describe in that specific manner. And thus, I think much of life out in the world is complex, it's fuzzy, it's blurry, it's not simple, it's not just black or white, one or the other, but our brains tend to work that way, and oftentimes what happens then is we create a new category with characteristics a little bit from this side and a little bit from this side, and we still try to find a box to put it in. Now sometimes that's just part of the didactic process, it's part of understanding something, it's part of being able to speak about something and to teach about something. But again, reality is not obligated to conform to our preconceived and pre-established categories. So the idea of somewhere in between, I think, is very satisfying, even without necessarily knowing whether it will relate to someone's, psycho-emotional state or the place along a journey where you're no longer at the starting point or at the destination, or where you're in a relationship but it's not easily definable or categorized. So yes, I'm curious how that phrase, which has a lot of inherent meaning in it, will play out in practice. Let's give them a listen. This is Kate Bush, Aerial Tale, followed by Somewhere in Between. I suppose a bird's tail is an aerial tale, right? She's duetting with a bird.
We went up to the top of the highest hill and stopped still. It was just so beautiful, it was just so beautiful, it was just so beautiful. This is where the shadows come to play twixt the day and night, dancing and skipping along the chink of light. Somewhere in between the waxing and the waiting. Somewhere in between all the song and the silences. Somewhere in between a ticking and talking clock. Somewhere in a dream between sleep and waking up. Somewhere in between breathing out and breathing in. Nor twilight is neither night nor morning.
Love that bass
Not
flourish.
one of us would dare to break the silence. Oh, how we have longed for something that would make us feel so. Somewhere in between the waxing and the waiting wave. Somewhere in between the night and the daylight. Somewhere in between the ticking and talking clock. Somewhere in between what the song and the silence say. Somewhere in between breathing out and breathing in.
So was that Bertie, I wonder? Ultimately, a beautiful tune. So, not only does it seem in some ways, or at least in small part, as a further expression of some of the ideas in Sunset, the idea of being between night and day, where, the sun isn't fully up, but it's not fully set either. And I was thinking, not just in relation to that connection, but the song gets at like liminal spaces, not necessarily or not exclusively physical, meaning like spaces where you pass through. They're not really spaces where you fully reside in one way or another, but they're more transitional, sort of the idea of an airport lobby. It's not somewhere where you necessarily stay. It's not like a destination, but it's not a starting point either. It's a space that is passed through, is experienced during a transition or during a process. And I feel like some of the concepts invoke the idea of like between a tick and a talk. It's, between two more significant or substantial measurements of incremental time. I feel like there were a number of dichotomies or descriptions suggested that spoke to that liminal or between transitional type of existence. It's somewhere in between, and there's something special that happens there. There's something of interest if we can focus our attention on acknowledging, recognizing, and appreciating those things which defy simple black and white one or the other categorization. So it feels like that was, in some sense, the essence of a number of the lines that I caught. Not that I caught every line, in part because Kate just has a beautiful voice. I know that's something that I've come to understand, and which people explain going back to the early phases of this deep dive, and people even talking about that study that suggested that of all the sort of popularly known voices, Kate's voice is one of the most pristine and perfect, shall we say. But yeah, the idea of going to the top of the hill. Of course, I'm thinking of the phrase "running up that hill," which lyrically, I don't feel like there were too many direct connections, but inevitably, a phrase like that is making me think of one of her hit tunes, and talking about how the shadows up there, they dance and they are twixt. Which anytime you have some lyrics which use I forget the exact like type of speech that you would call that, where it's sort of like a colloquial rendering of a more like full or proper word. But anytime you have lyrics with twixt, you're already winning. But the idea of the way they dance and they engage in movement or compelling activity that is particularly entrancing to our eyes and to our brains. And shadows themselves, it's not light, but it's not an object either. It's the absence of light caused by the presence of an object between us and the light that would otherwise shine onto another surface. So even the concept of a shadow is itself sort of getting at that, like, it's not one thing, but it's not fully another. It's representative of this transitional or intermediate type of experience or phenomena, perhaps best. So yeah, like a really interesting track that I'm definitely going to have to listen to and catch more of the nuances of, and how they express the theme that seems to be at play. But yeah, I like the almost like Brazilian jazz kind of feel to the Sonics. It had this shuffle to it. It had this, what's the right word, like energetic motion, but it wasn't like big or bombastic or powerful. It just kind of had this soft movement to it, and a bit of this kind of like nighttime or like twilight energy, which given the lines about being between night and day and between measurable or identifiable measurements of time, it felt like maybe a type of sonic atmosphere that was making me think of like, it's kind of like right when you're getting into the evening, that kind of, it's past the bright shine of day, but it's not necessarily the dark, cold feeling of night. It's somewhere in between. So that's what the Sonics brought to my brain. Do let me know what you think of these tunes, or, in particular, the Somewhere in Between. Though I did enjoy, again, we heard two duets, right? We heard her duetting with a bird, and the ability to have the creative vocalizations, almost like onomatopoeias of sounds that a bird makes, and then pairing them with the actual bird sounds in real time, I thought was very compelling and creative. And then we definitely heard a male vocal doubling some of her lines in the Somewhere in Between track. I wonder, is that the same male voice that we heard in The Painter's Link? It didn't necessarily sound like it. And I appreciate people's context, and people were saying that in later versions of this album, Bertie ended up doing the lines that had been done by someone else at first, so I was curious to know who that person duetting with her, or at least accompanying her in this somewhere in between track was. In any case, let me know what you think, and the very comfortable and sleepy Luca and I will see you next time. Peace.